Hi HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by Bathobile Archer. Bato is the Global HR Director at Coca-Cola. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Hi, Chris. I appreciate you having me on the show. I'm very honored to be here, actually.
Oh, thank you. The honor is all mine.
Thank you.
Fill in the gaps. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey to where we are today.
Okay, so my journey started in Swaziland, where I'm from. I'm actually born and bred in Swaziland, which is a country in the southern part of Africa with less than 1.2 million people. And so we basically know everybody there. And so I was born and raised there. I studied law, so I'm a lawyer by profession. And I majored in labor law. So industrial relations was basically my area, my forte. I then, after finishing university, I joined obviously a law firm, and I did practice for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then I got bored, honestly, because I felt like I was doing a lot of, the same kind of stuff, and I wanted something different. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to do something a little bit more than just going to court and representing clients, as it were. So I obviously got an opportunity to then work with a conciliation or a mediation body that we have in Swaziland. Basically, the role of that body is to conciliate or mediate between employers and employees and try to find a resolution. So before you go to court, you would have to go through this process. So I worked for that organization for about 2 years as well. And again, I got a little bored because I thought I was a little young for the job. It felt like it was a big job, and it was interesting because it was different things at different things and at different times. But I still felt that I wanted to understand corporate a little bit more and get to work with companies a little bit more versus being on the back end of the process, where basically people have fallen out and they're coming to you for a resolution, and you want to be part of how do you build an employee relations environment that is quite conducive. So I was approached by the Federation of Employers and Chamber of Commerce, which is basically a Chamber of Commerce just fused with employer organization as well. So I led the Industrial Relations and Social Policy Directorate for that organization. It was one of my best jobs, actually, because it grew me. It really did, from a professional standpoint as well as from a personal standpoint. So what this role did was I was tasked with, of course, leading the industrial relations piece, which basically was advocacy for employers. It also meant that you represented employers in outside of the country meetings, in issues of social policy issues like child labor, women and HIV. You had issues around industrial relations as well. I also got an opportunity to practice law as well, still, whilst I was in that role. So I sort of represented employers at the industrial court. And I sort of had, everything in one sort of basket. So I really did grow personally in that space. Now, the one thing that I realized when I was in that role was that companies used to come to me, obviously, with issues and challenges, but I felt that I was a little raw, as a little green. I needed some experience to understand how corporate really runs. What's the day-to-day? What are the nuts and bolts of an organization? How do you get to a place where you're actually setting up policies? How do you get to a place where you're driving volume, revenue? What does that look like even on a day-to-day basis? So I got approached by Coke, actually, because Coke was one of our members with the Federation of Employers. And so in one of our meetings, I actually did, share this, aspiration of mine to work for a global company and to do something a little bit more than what I was doing at the time. And so I got approached by Coke. So that was 2007. So I joined the company in 2007, and I have been with the company for 10 years. And it's been an amazing 10 years. I need to tell you this. It's just been an amazing 10 years. I always refer to myself as the Coke bottle, how the bubble will, sort of start from the bottom of the Coke bottle and sort of bubble its way up. That's how I really felt, to be honest. And that's my experience. A 10-year bubble. That's what it's been. So it's been an awesome journey. So I joined the company in Swaziland, as I said, and today I'm in Atlanta. So my journey has been different experiences. I have been an expatriate, living in different countries, diverse cultures, diverse people, learning different things about the company as well, how we make money, where do we make money, how do we even, go to the street? Because when you sit at the corporate office here, we don't see any trucks that leave the building. So if you start off by just looking at it from that perspective, then you wonder how we actually get ourselves to the shelves or to the consumer's hands. So I got to experience that. And in some instances, I rode the truck, and I did certain things that was just exciting. But it's been an awesome journey. So I've sort of lived through if you're familiar with the Dave Ulrich's model, I've sort of lived through the 3 triangles. So I was part of the global business services. And I did employee relations for the Africa region. Basically, it was a GBS role at the time. It transitioned after a while to be a COE. So then I moved into that space where you're basically leading policies and you're driving certain changes from a policy standpoint, as well as from you're starting to provide thought leadership in that area, and you're a center of expertise. So they see you as an HR business partner for employee relations. So that's what I did. And then I then became a strategic business partner with the Central East and West Africa Business Unit based out of Nairobi for 4 years. Actually, I was there and I had a time of my life before I moved to Atlanta. And I've been in Atlanta since 2016. So I've been here for almost 2 years and taken over this global role. And it's just been phenomenal for me. It's just been amazing.
Wow, what a journey! What a journey! I think you've probably hit the #1 spot now for the most interesting journey on our show.
Well, thank you.
Well, you have, and look, if you've been there for 10 years, then they must be doing something right to keep you engaged for 10 years and to keep you interested and help you to keep developing is pretty incredible. So. It's very interesting. One question, just going back to your point about your background, what are some of the things that you've taken away from, being a lawyer that have helped you in HR? Just out of
my gosh, nothing.
Really?
Well, that is a joke. One of the things that I actually get frowns, to be honest, I get frowned upon. People, when people find out that I'm a lawyer, actually, they sort of go, well, that's not a good HR practitioner because, you're hard, you're a lawyer, you're, systems and systematic and so legalistic in everything that you do. And to the contrary, actually, I think I may have been lost in law, to be honest. May have been lost. This probably is where I'm supposed to be because I felt I connect so much with people. I connect so much with the business as well. So it's really, I think, to your question, so without going on a rabbit trail, to your question, the one thing that I found to be useful as a lawyer is that you step back. You're able to step back from the emotions. You're able to step back from the gray, and you're able to see things a little different. Whilst we have a lot of gray in our area in HR, and most of the time or some of the time, you find yourself battling with how to sort of remove yourself from that gray or even to find the right way to sort of manage that gray. As a lawyer, you're able to pull back and say, what is the policy? What is the right thing to do? What's the precedence? Have we done this before? If we do it this way? So you sort of question yourself. There's certain sort of a checklist in my head that I have as a lawyer that I have to ask myself. And then obviously you ask yourself, what's the exposure? If I do it this way, does the company get in trouble? And it's easy when you're following your heart and your gut feel and you want to do something the right way for people. But you put yourself and the company at risk. So it's actually a question of how to balance that.
Yeah, very interesting because you've had to do that on every single case. You've had to step away from it and then assess it with what you just said. And I can see already in a business how that will come in handy because, you're stepping away, putting emotions to one side, putting, feelings and everything else and going, looking at the black and white and seeing, very interesting. I'm glad I asked that question now. And also you must be pretty good at arguing your point in the boardroom. That must help.
I am actually that has been my development area.
Oh, really?
Yes, because I think I've learned to influence versus argue because I obviously over the years I've had to sort of change my my approach to how I disagree and commit if I have to commit because as you grow in your career you learn the art and the importance of not always having it your way. But also just being able to, say this is what we've agreed to, and I'm going to respect that and be amicable to some of even when you don't agree. So
I can imagine a lawyer inside you just fighting.
I know. Yeah, that's true.
Could you share one project or transformation that you've been through that stands out to you that you're most proud of?
Sure. I've been very fortunate to have worked in, for the company in many different projects. But the one that I can immediately think of that was quite transformational for me was one that I felt pushed me and challenged me a little bit to think outside the box and to sort of create stuff from scratch, as it were. So I'll take the example of when we were acquiring an organization. There was an M&A that was impending in one of our Africa region offices. So we were tasked with, obviously, as a project team, to then lead the work with regards to the merger and acquisition and do the diligence. So one of the things that I pride myself in, or that I liked about Coke, basically, was when I joined the company, it was how when you join a global company, you know that the templates are already there, that there's a certain way of doing things, that you already know how to go in and do something. So I was expecting that, of course, when I go into an M&A, I would have some HR, guidance in terms of what it would take to be successful when doing due diligence for an M&A, etc. To my surprise, there was none. There was nothing, actually. And so I had to reach out to people to say, hey, do you have anything that I could use? And I didn't hear anything back from my colleagues, even, overseas. And so I had to start from scratch, basically. So I think that was an opportunity for me to consolidate at least a little bit of what I had known about the business, and also to start to think about what is it that we would be looking for. If you're going to an M&A, for example, from a talent perspective, what are the things you need to start thinking about? What are the due diligence stuff or things that you need to do and make sure are in place before you start to drive the synergy with the other company? So I felt that that was an opportunity for me to sort of, grow and sort of step up. And I surprised myself as well. And I think the team as well, as we worked together, I think that's one of the things that I took away from that project was when you go in as a team, and it doesn't matter who does what, and you're all pushing towards a common goal, people are willing to help each other. People are willing to sort of ask the questions that they would ask, to get into your shoes a little bit. They're able to walk with you and work with you. So I found that the team that I worked with for that M&A was extraordinary, and we're able to acquire that business in West Africa.
Mm-hmm. Where did you start then? When you realized, I'm going to have to take a fresh approach to this and build something from the ground up. What were the things that you thought that you identified? What are the first steps that you took?
So first of all, I had to read. I had to go and research. So I was on the computer and looking M&As, HR or people, what to look for, etc. And so there weren't many templates, to be honest, even online. But they so what I got most was, things to consider when you're doing an M&A. So do you have the right talent with the company that you're going to acquire? If not, how do you build the talent? Do you have the right capabilities? Do they have a union, for example? Are they unionized, or what's the labor environment? What's the tax regime like? How does that then link, or what are the synergies between the way Coke does things, or as a company you do things, versus the other company? And so starting to then think about how do you build a plan that transitions or moves the company that you're acquiring to be closer to what you stand for as a business. So it required both some reading and also some interviews. I had to schedule some interviews with the company and sort of ask some questions in terms of, could we get, because they were loading some data, of course, in a typical M&A, they will dump the data in a central place, and you could just go in and sort of read what you can, and then you get the employee profile, you get to understand whether you have a risk in terms of retention or people choosing to retire instead of moving over to the new company, or once they are acquired, etc. So I had to think of all those things, but I think the internet was my best friend, to be honest, in that space, because I just had to read, and I would go to the team, to the point I made earlier, that I go to the team and said, guys, I don't know, but this is what I found, and this is how I'd like to proceed. And the team was sort of just on the ball as well, just helping one another to get to a complete results. And we did. I had a plan. I had a plan. At the end of the day, I had a plan. It was the first 120 days, and we stuck to it. So it was a good plan.
I love your honest answer as well, because so many people think there's this quick fix or there's a solution that exists out there, where most of the successful people I speak to, they say they literally exactly what you did. You have to just go out there, research, find out, look online. The internet, as you said, everything exists on the internet that you're going to need. And a lot of people wouldn't say that, what you just said. It's such an honest answer. But that's exactly what you need to do. Even when you're representing $1 billion global brand. But that's just the reality of the situation, right?
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
Looking back, what advice would you give to other HR leaders on that journey? Because it's something every company I speak to now, they're going through mergers and acquisitions throughout the year. What advice would you give?
I think one is obviously codify. I think one of the things that I probably did not get my hands on was data that had been used before. I mean, Coke has done so many M&As. It's just, do we codify it? And is it in a place where people can actually easily access it? So I think one is, let's write it down. Like, I had to write down my experience so that if anybody comes after me, they can actually refer to that M&A and say that transaction went well because there was a people plan that was thought through, that had, there were steps that were followed, and you can actually trace and sort of have a trail of what steps were taken to get to where we got to. So I think one would be to make sure that you codify those things. Two is, I think, sharing as well. Because I think when we, imagine if we had our own HR meeting and global meeting, and we had to talk about this acquisition. Or if somebody was doing something similar somewhere. And so pulling out those things, and I'm not saying that it hadn't happened before, perhaps I probably had missed it, maybe if it had happened, but pulling out those things that are unique, where HR is asked to come to the table before an M&A is done, and you're still considering it, and you're doing your due diligence. There's nothing more important for the HR function to be actually called to sit at the table and to start to influence and to make decisions at that level. So something like that for me would have stood out for sure, to say, let's talk about this. How do we, as HR professionals, put ourselves in a place where we can actually influence and drive the right kind of decisions with the right kind of data, do the right kind of analytics? What kind of support can we give to one another to sort of get that through? So I think in hindsight, that's what I would probably advocate for. Get it written down, share it as well. When you have a project that's out of the norm, as it were, so that people can actually get some insights. And I think the other thing is obviously a network. If I had networked a little bit more, and I think that was something I didn't do well in Nairobi, in Kenya, where I was based for 4 years, probably if I had networked better within the industry and within, because you have all the multinationals there, I'm sure somebody had done it. And if I just had reached out to those people a little bit more, I would have probably had something to start off with. But at the same time, good came out of it, because I now can start from.
But it forced you to dig deep, right, and to go head on, and there was no other way, right?
For sure.
I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful it is to have that network around you, and that's exactly why we do what we do within my own organization. Is that we bring all of these companies together to help each other along their journey. And sometimes the biggest piece of advice, of value, is just validating that you're going in the right direction, and you're doing that right things with your peers. Something I say it's something as small as that, but that is a huge relief for a lot of people to go, okay, we are doing the right thing. We're going through the right processes. All of these organizations have been there before. I'm not the only one that's stressed out. I'm not the only one who's getting sleepless nights. So I'm not the only one having an internal battle. So it's that is huge as well. So what was the takeaway for you after going through that process in that period?
One of the things that was I think a big takeaway for me was, obviously, to your point, where that I had to dig deep. It stretched me. So takeaway was one. I think sometimes we underestimate ourselves, and I'm not just talking to myself because I'm trying to put myself and portray myself in a different light, but I'm just saying people in general. We do have the tendency to underestimate ourselves. When there's a task that's ahead of you and you lose sleep over it because you're thinking, oh my gosh. And I bet you the worry is not even so much that, I'm trying to get the data together, there's delay in getting something. It is, how am I going to do this? It's like, the worry is, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. Versus thinking about how do I put everything together and start to make it happen. Because I mean, uncharted path is, you're going to face that every now and then. And that's what especially in our career, with everything that's changing in HR as we know it has changed. And when they talk about moving your cheese and everything else, that's what it is. It's just changed on us. And whilst before we were personal officers, we went with the HR transformation. We did the tripod, the three-way model. We're moving to a different space where the companies and the business is asking us to play at a different place. We need to be leading versus the ones that are coming to the table late. We need to be, following the sun, as it were, or following the trends. What's happening outside? How do we bring that into the company? What are the things that are cutting edge out there? So I think for me, the learning was just that I could actually, if I could do that at that point, then I can do, I mean, almost, you give me whatever I need to do, I can do it.
Yeah.
That was the lesson.
100%.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
You find that the most difficult challenges that you go through and times like you did, they're the most rewarding. You get the most out of it. When you come out on the other end from something a few months ago where you thought, I can't do it, what am I going to do? And everyone's, everyone experiences that in no matter what job you have, or even just in life, as you said.
Yeah.
When you come out of that, it really builds a lot of character in you. And then next time you're faced with a similar situation, then you're like, you know what, I can do this.
That's true. Yeah.
It feels really good. So gratifying when you, I'm pretty crazy in that way now. I've kind of trained myself that if I'm scared of something or it's challenging, I run towards that.
That's
and
it.
The more and more I do that, the more I'm training myself to the point where I'm just trying stuff all of the time. I'm not scared. Podcast, I was scared of doing it.
Yeah.
And then I Googled how to do podcast. And then literally now I have a podcast. And, speaking to you, a few months ago would have been very intimidating for me to do that on a podcast form. And talking to you normally it's fine, but being a host of a podcast, it was a big hurdle to overcome. So pretty incredible. You basically led perfectly onto my next question with what you just said a second ago. Where do you see, what HR skills do you feel will be more important in the future as we're going through this transformation now? What are your thoughts there?
I was actually reading an article recently from, I think it was Mercer that published an article, and they were talking about obviously our realities, which is, and I think at Coca-Cola we live this every day. The consumers are changing, right? Their choices are different. They are asking for something different, and as a company, you sort of want to make sure that you are meeting the needs of your consumer. From a company where we've said typically we're a Coca-Cola company, we're largely sparkling, and we have changed our operating model, even our vision, to say we want to be a total beverage company. So how do we make ourselves available at every occasion? So when a person wakes up and thinks of taking water to drink, or they think of having milk for their breakfast, or they think of having tea at 10 o'clock, or at lunchtime they have a Coke, or they want to have a soda, how do we make sure we're present at every occasion, so that at every occasion there's an interaction between us and the consumer? So companies have been forced to sort of think differently in terms of how we bring us offering or our services to the consumer. So that then says, from an HR standpoint, there is a place where we have to think about the talent that we have today. So do we have the right capabilities within, the HR function, or even within the organization itself? So being a talent manager and a talent leader is going to be very important in my view, where you're able to think about what are the skills, the talent in its totality. So as a whole person, or as a whole talent, what are the capabilities that they need in order for them to be able to deliver value to the business, right? Mm-hmm. Also, from a business perspective, just overall, what are the kind of structures that you need as a business? So organizational design, not so much design, but engineering. So how do I think about, so with AI, for example, coming in. So you have a lot of AI now coming into the organizations, and there's automation, there's AI. So you're thinking, where do I place a human being? Where do I place AI, and where do I automate? So that end-to-end engineering, as an HR professional, you no longer now have to think about where do I place a certain person. You have to think about what other resources are available. Where can I leverage data? Where can I leverage technology? Where can I leverage AI and the tools that are available to drive the business results that the business is looking for. So I think if I were to summarize the skills that I think are important, one is obviously being able to design the organization, engineer the organization the right way, thinking about the talent, virtual management as well. How do you help organizations drive a culture in a virtual environment where people feel they're disconnected one way or another? I mean, look at you. I'm talking to you via, I mean, this is, I feel like you're right in front of me.
It's true. We're so used to it now, aren't we?
That's it. That's true. And so how do we leverage, how do we leverage that? How do we, make that real and make it work for the company, for the companies that we work for? Because we have so many employees, our footprint for the company is everywhere, basically. And you have employees that are 2 or 3 in some place somewhere, and their teams largely are sitting in a different part of the world. How do you create a culture where they feel they're part of that team? How do you leverage technology to drive a virtual team, as it were? So I think those are the things that I would think about if I were to, say the critical skills for HR going forward.
Yeah, and with all these changes, by the way, I completely agree with you. As to where we can, of course. How do you keep yourself then up to date and constantly abreast of what's happening out there? Because we've seen in the last, I think, 2 years, it's been such a shift. From even in the last 10 years that I've been working in HR, it looks nothing like when I first sort of got into the HR industry. It was mainly just administrative tasks. HR wasn't even strategic at that point. And now we're talking about AI and predictive, prescriptive analytics, etc. It's completely, HR is going through its own digital transformation. So how do you, as a leader that came into the profession in one area and now looking at where we're going forward with technology, how are you keeping yourself up to date, and how are you preparing the team for this?
Yeah, good question, Chris, because I don't think I'm doing enough, to be honest. So I do read. So I read. So I subscribe to some newsletters where I just probably get them every day. There's something coming through every day on my email on what's happening. There's webinars and stuff. So I try to sort of keep myself, looped in. So I'm in the loop in terms of what's going on around me. So I read. 2 is obviously I encourage my team, and I do this. I read and I sort of share articles with my team. I'm like, hey, this is interesting. What do you guys think? Let's talk about it. So in my team meetings, I sort of, let's talk about the hot topics. What is it that you read that was exciting for you? What is it that you think, we should do differently? For example, challenges. Help us think if you found something out there that you like, that you think could actually work. And some of the team, I mean, we have a fairly new team. Some people just came in last year from a different company, and I was actually challenging them. This was the start of the year to say, I want to hear what you guys were doing in your previous roles, your previous companies, that we can take and learn, because you can always learn from other companies as well. So we don't have it all, we don't know it all. So how do we make sure that we do that? The other thing that we are doing as a team as well is to set up time with other similar type companies that are in our industry, to say, hey, can we share best practice, in a formal or formal way, where we actually take an hour and just go there and say, hey, let's talk about talent. What are you doing from a talent perspective? So one of my partners actually is Walgreens, that I've been talking to recently, just about, what are they doing in the space of talent? What about the space of culture? What are the things that you guys are excited about these days? And so it helps to keep your pulse, your finger on the pulse on what's happening around you as well. And obviously, I think for me, the best thing is obviously the reading piece.
No problem. Is your light gone off?
Yeah.
It's all right. It happens all the time.
No, that's the time. So when you don't move, there's no movement.
Sorry, mine's the same. Why do you think I'm swiveling around in my chair?
Okay. My apologies. I have to keep doing that as well.
That's all right. So just out of interest, because you're the first person to mention just, reaching out to other companies and, setting up that network to benchmark against each other. It seems so obvious, but I don't think many organizations do that. Take the time just to do that. What feedback have you got when you've just reached out to other organizations like Walgreens? What kind of feedback do you get from these guys when you reach out to them?
Yeah. So, obviously, it's orchestrated. It's well orchestrated. It's not just it's not ad hoc that I would just reach out. So it's quite targeted. And I've actually used people like an alumni that used to work here. So I always follow people that have worked in the company, Coca-Cola company before. And when they've moved to another company, I use that as my entry point to say, hey,
sense.
you know,
Yeah.
so that it feels, because again, people are not very, they don't feel comfortable to share data. People typically just skeptical. What do you want to do with it? Are you going to use it? Are you going to quote me? And are you going to quote if I say something, are you going to quote me in a report, etc.? So people are very guarded in terms of how they share information. So it works. If for me it has, and again, Chris, remember this: I'm not from the United States, so I have just moved here 2 years ago. And I'm still building my network. And obviously it will take a bit of time, but I'm using what I know and people that I've already known to say, how do I connect with you? How do I get to hear what you guys are doing? So I think for me, what's worked has been that. And I do see it changing over time, obviously, and getting more. Recently we had one of my leaders hosted a sort of a roundtable discussion. And so they had the discussion, and then after that they invited the HR leadership to sort of come in and mingle with some of the leaders. And to be honest, I actually have a meeting next week with a lady, she's in New York, and we sort of missed each other because we sort of met for like 5 minutes and we exchanged emails, or like, I need to hear what you do in HR. She's like, yes, I need to also so things like that, where you actually look for opportunities to connect, and then you can start the conversations, and you sort of build that rapport, and you sort of get to a place where you can start sharing information. So I think there's so much that people are doing out there that if you don't reach out, you will never know, and you will struggle when you don't have to.
Yeah, no, and it doesn't take a lot of time to reach out, and you'll be very surprised at the response you get. A lot of people are afraid they might not get a reply back, and that's just human, right? People don't want to get hurt, or people don't. Whereas I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I'm sure you get many people reply back to you, and here we are.
Appreciate that.
And it's sometimes as simple as that. And I can only imagine if I was a senior HR leader reaching out to another person, that would be even easier for me to have these conversations. So I think that's definitely good advice. Going back to the first point you mentioned, because I think it's fascinating, your journey of going from where you were to where you are now. It's completely culturally, completely two different worlds. If you correct me if I'm wrong. And what advice would you give to others that are making a similar transition from moving to foreign country, different culture, completely different environment? What advice, what have you learned, and what advice would you give to other leaders?
Interesting. It's a good question, actually. I hadn't thought about that, but here's my attempt to respond to that. So my advice would be a student. I think you have to be a student, be willing to learn. Being out of your comfort zone humbles you. It does. Because you don't know, when you, for example, I give myself as an example. So when I was in the business unit, when I was in the continent, I felt that I was the go-to person. So if the leaders wanted something, they went straight to me, and I sort of knew what was where. I knew everybody. And I knew why we had done things the way that we had done them, right? Fast forward, I'm in the US, different culture, different organization, sort of, in terms of just the structure.
Yeah, of course.
And it's corporate, it's the headquarters. It is intimidating. Just walking through this building is intimidating. It's a beautiful building. It's big. It's a lot of people. It's serious people. It's people that are obviously at the corporate level are, you've seen them once when you're in the field, and they come in, and there's an entourage that comes with them. They're coming here for serious business meetings. And then suddenly you're actually in the same space with them. But you are basically not, people don't know you. So you have to sort of establish your own, network, and sort of get to know people, set up some time to get to know people. So learning, I think for me, was one thing that it sort of helped me, was to learn, to actually set up time with people that I felt I'd known, I'd touched base with before whilst I was in the field, and asking people who are similar like me, who had moved to the United States from Africa, for example, what is it that you battled with? What are the things that that you found challenging? Or what are the things that helped you? You had a support system. I had a strong support system when I left home, but that was 2010. I left home 2010, and I left home with a child. And I single parented for a long time. And I had to build my own support structure. So when I went to South Africa, I had to build a support structure. When I went to Nairobi, Kenya, I had to build a support structure around him. And I had to do the same thing. So you sort of learn to build a support structure. So you have to have one. You will not survive. So learn, build a support structure, and make use of people that are willing to help you. And sometimes you are a little uncomfortable with people just wanting to extend themselves towards you. Sometimes be a little more trusting as well, to say, well, give people a chance a little bit, because some people are good. Most people are good and they want to help. They generally want to help because others will understand when you're moving around and you need a support structure. You need to leave your child. You need to go to a meeting. You need to travel. How do you do that in a place where you actually don't have family around? So I'd say my advice would be that just learn and build a support structure around you.
Yeah. And as you said, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one thing that stands out from what you just said is you probably don't see it as such a great skill, but you every time you've made one of those steps, you've not waited around for someone to help you. You established yourself. You've gone out there, had conversations. You made a conscious effort to speak to people, to have those one-on-ones with them, ask questions, learn, and really and sort of dive deep into the deep end. Really, it couldn't be more scary. I'm scared just thinking about it. Leaving when you're a single parent, traveling to the US is incredible what you've achieved, honestly. So for me, coming from a background where my mum was a single parent with 4 kids, and that was hard enough in the UK, and then you're traveling to a whole different continent. It's pretty incredible. So congratulations on what you've achieved.
Thank you. Pretty amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, look, that leads us quite nicely on to the quick fire round.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
Okay. Amazing? I don't know, but fire on.
No problem. What's the best piece of business advice that you've ever received?
Gosh. Oh, is that the most difficult one? Because I think it is. So believe in yourself.
Yeah, no, that's a huge piece of business advice. I think that's one of the things that stops everyone.
That's what I got.
Yeah, if you ask anyone, what held you back, and it was just didn't believe in themselves. They're scared.
Yeah.
What's one thing that was holding you back from being a senior HR leader?
Good question. I felt that I didn't have the experience that most HR leaders had. I felt that I had not earned my stripes enough to be there. So I did not believe in myself, and I had a lot of doubts. So I felt there was another person than there was me, so I always felt there was a close second. There was, somebody else better than me. And so that was holding me back until I probably got to a place where I understood. And one leader said to me, actually, and I think maybe this is the best advice, he said, I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. And that was just, that sort of unlocked something in me.
Fantastic. What's one book that you'd recommend to our audience, and why?
Today Matters by John Maxwell. He's awesome, by the way. He's awesome. I mean, he's just awesome. He's awesome. So why? Because it has some 12 commitments that you make to yourself daily. One of them is I will, have the right attitude. I will, act on the important priorities. I will, take care of my finances. I will do the right things by my family, caring for family, etc. So it's sort of, you may not go through all 12 every day, and you may just meet one every day that I'll manage the priorities, etc. In some instances, you don't have a choice; you have to manage the priorities. But what it does is sort of just grounds you on the things that you sort of speak the things that you want to be. So those it helps you one day at a time. So you sort of just can take one for 1 week and say, well, I'm working on this one commitment instead of all 12, and you can sort of slowly get to a place where you feel a little comfortable in terms of your commitments.
Fantastic. Could you share one internet resource that you use to keep yourself up to date with current events or your own learning?
Oh my gosh, what? Mercer, Forbes. I mean, I just go on their newsletters. That's the one. I mean, that's the easiest one.
No.
That's why I go. And HR newsletter. I mean, there's what's
Or LinkedIn,
I mean,
how we met.
oh yes, LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn pops up. I don't have to go to LinkedIn. It actually comes to me because
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah, they actually have a daily rundown of everyday stuff that you can sort of to have, specific conversations about professionals, what they're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
And they have about 4 or 5 points that you can sort of just read through and so sound intelligent as well when you talk to people. So I think I like that. So LinkedIn is actually awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So out of all of the online resources, which one do you think gives you the most value?
LinkedIn, for sure. LinkedIn, because it's interactive as well. It's very interactive. It's not just one piece of data being dumped to you. You actually get to interact in these comments and sections, and people are actually able to share their thoughts. So I like the interaction on LinkedIn, for sure. Yep.
Fantastic. Could you share one thing about your business that you're most excited about?
Oh, the future. I mean, my gosh, the total beverage company, the total beverage portfolio, that's what excites me every day. I mean, I wish we had done this 10 years ago. It's awesome. It is awesome. It is awesome. And I think we have a great leader who actually believes in that strategy. So I'm sold 120% behind the strategy. I think we're going to do great. We'll nail it.
They've kept you there for 10 years. So let's see if they can keep you there for another 10 years.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, look, you've been an amazing guest. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Give our listeners, if there's one parting piece of guidance or one piece of advice that you could give to other HR leaders out there, what would that be?
Don't stop learning. Just be a student. I think that's it. And thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate, Chris. I mean, this has been a great opportunity for me to sort of connect with you and sort of talk through some of the things that are in my mind. Appreciate it so much. Thank you.
No problem. Well, look, guys, make sure you head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all the show notes from the episode, everything we've been talking about. Thank you again for taking your time to join us. And I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you.